as inept. Let's discuss this and more with Democratic Senator Chris Coons. He serves on the Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, your reaction to this announcement of a resignation?
Well, Allison, this is truly unfortunate. I know Sir Kim Darrow well. He has served the United Kingdom extremely well as their ambassador here in our nation's capital. And every country sends ambassadors overseas, in part so that they can send back open, clear-eyed, blunt assessments of how that other country views them and how it's functioning. And the leak of this confidential cable has produced an unfortunate flap that has now led to the resignation of a very skilled career foreign servant. I will point out part of what drove this was President Trump taking to Twitter to insult the ambassador, to insult Theresa May, the outgoing Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. We have long enjoyed a close and special relationship with the UK that is rooted in our shared values as well as our interests. And I think it's unfortunate that this latest flap has further accelerated some of the distance between us. They will choose a new prime minister in just a few weeks. And in any event, there almost certainly would have been a new ambassador posted at that point. So I think Sir Kim has done what was the right thing from a career perspective. I will be sad to see him go.
But for foreign relations, what does this mean? If our ambassadors have to worry about their unvarnished assessments being leaked, what does it mean for what they report back to their home offices?
Well, as you remember, we had a similarly embarrassing incident a number of years ago where a trove of classified confidential cables within the U.S. State Department was leaked, and it caused some real tension and challenges for us with a number of our allies. Frankly, ambassadors still need to do their job. A core piece of their job is letting those of us in the State Department, in the executive branch, and here in the Congress who are responsible for foreign policy have real and insightful commentary on what's happening around the world. So, I think it's important that those cables be frank, but it's also important that they be confidential.
I want to get to the substance of what he was trying to tell Her Majesty, basically, back in England with this cable. And I just want to read it again because I think that the substance of it is important. He wrote back, "We really don't believe that this administration is going to become substantially more normal, less dysfunctional, less unpredictable, less faction-riven, less diplomatically clumsy and inept." What does it tell you, Senator, that the ambassador, the British ambassador, felt that message was important to send back to Britain?
Well, Allison, one of the most concerning developments of the last 2 years has been the ways in which Donald Trump, who as a candidate promised he would be unconventional, and who I'll remind you is our first president with no previous service, either military or elected in the public sector, the ways in which he set out not just to shake up and test or challenge some of the structures we've relied on for 7 decades to keep us prosperous and secure, like NATO, like our alliances and relationships in Western Europe. But he set about to really challenge them so strongly that he's almost broken them. I've heard similar input from foreign ministers, from heads of state, from a dozen countries across Europe and Asia in my work on the Foreign Relations Committee. And I think we need to pay attention to this. In the run-up to the 2020 election, a lot of why I'm supporting my good friend Joe Biden is that as a former chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, as a former vice president, he enjoys the kind of respect and confidence across our allies around the world that would allow us to restore these relationships almost immediately if he were elected.
I want to move on to what's happening with Secretary of Labor Alex Acosta. You have called on him to resign in light of this plea deal, this very unusual plea deal coming to light with what he offered Jeffrey Epstein, so far beneath any of the standards for the crime. He doesn't seem inclined to resign. And so what happens next? How does he continue as labor secretary, which, by the way, is tasked with issues of human trafficking? Right. How does he continue in his job?
I think it'll be exceptionally difficult for him to be an effective Secretary of Labor. I do expect that the House will take up investigations into the relationship between Secretary Acosta, Mr. Epstein, President Trump, and others in his broader circle to try and better understand how this striking plea agreement was reached. A federal court has already ruled that it was an inappropriate plea agreement because the victims, the human trafficking victims who were Jeffrey Epstein's victims of his sexual predation, were not informed.
Didn't they
and
say
consulted.
illegal, Senator? I mean, sorry to interrupt,
Yes.
but beyond inappropriate, didn't they say illegal?
Yes, they said it violated federal law, which is striking. And to your point, Allison, the Secretary is charged with combating human trafficking. We have an important agenda here in the United States, both within our country and around the world, to combat the most gross violations of labor rights, which are known as human trafficking. Jeffrey Epstein, for years, was engaged in sex trafficking of American girls who were minors. I can't think of a more horrific fact pattern or case. And the idea that he was allowed, after his sentencing, after his plea agreement, to be chauffeured to work rather than actually serving his time in prison, and that his sentence was so unthinkably light. Frankly, the Secretary has a lot of explaining to do to justify why that was an appropriate plea agreement. I don't think he can meet that standard, and that's why I've joined many of my colleagues in calling for his resignation.
Senator Chris Coons, thank you very much for giving us your assessment on all of this, including the breaking news this hour.
Thank you,
Great to talk to
Allison.
John.
All right, her play and her